She stepped into the school to protect the kids, but nobody imagined how far one boy would go who would come to stop him. Stay with us, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The sun hadn't even crested the Texas horizon when Jessica Cena pulled her modest black SUV into the parking lot of St. James Preparatory Academy, nestled on the outskirts of Dallas. Even at dawn, the air was warm and heavy with the promise of another punishing summer day. Around her, the polished Suburbans and sleek Teslas gleamed beneath the floodlights, each adorned with bumper stickers proclaiming, "Proud St. James Parent," or "The crest of the school's award-winning football team." Jessica sat for a moment in the hush of her vehicle, gripping the steering wheel, her breath moving in and out as she gathered herself for what she had already decided would be a season of purpose. In the rearview mirror, her reflection was calm and composed, but behind her hazel eyes glimmered a fierce determination. At 50, Jessica Cena remained striking. Her hair was pulled into a smooth, low bun, her skin glowed from careful care, and her posture was impeccable, a relic of the discipline instilled in her during years on runways, magazine shoots, and under the scrutinizing gaze of cameras. The world knew her as the wife of John Cena, the wrestling superstar, actor, and larger-than-life figure who seemed to command every room he entered with his booming presence and easy charisma. But Jessica was more than the image others carried of her. She was here to prove it. To herself as much as to anyone else. She didn't need the money. She didn't need the validation of a nameplate on a classroom door. But she did need to know she was making a difference. Months earlier, she'd begun volunteering with groups supporting girls who'd faced relentless bullying at school. Girls whose once bright spirits had been crushed under the weight of whispers, mockery, and casual cruelty. Jessica had organized fundraisers, written checks, delivered impassioned speeches, but the further she went, the more she realized that speeches and donations weren't enough. She needed to see it with her own eyes. The hushed corridors, the trembling voices, the quiet sobs behind bathroom doors. So she'd signed up for the Inspire Through Presence initiative, determined to serve where she could make a difference. When St. James offered her a position, they practically boasted about it on their website, a subtle flex in the world of elite private schools, as if merely having John Cena's wife on the faculty list made them somehow more prestigious. Behind closed doors, though, Jessica suspected that many in the administration saw her as harmless decoration, a figurehead to smile and nod during pickup and drop-off, a pleasant face to soothe the wealthy parents without ever rocking the boat. From her first day, Jessica felt the tension buzzing beneath the glossy surface of the school. The corridors were lined with framed photographs of alumni who had gone on to Ivy League universities, oil fortunes, and glittering careers. Championship banners for the football team hung like royal drapery along the hallways. Teachers moved briskly but carefully with polite smiles, their eyes darting toward the glass office doors behind which the headmaster and dean presided like quiet monarchs. It became clear to Jessica quickly that the unspoken rule at St. James was simple. Do your job, keep your head down, and don't question what has worked for decades. But Jessica had not come to be silent decoration. It didn't take long for her to see cracks in the perfect facade. They started small, barely perceptible. The way some students flinched when certain boys passed by in the hallway. The cautious glances traded between girls huddled at lunch tables. The way laughter would abruptly die when a name was called across the cafeteria. It felt like walking over a still pond and sensing dark shapes moving in the depths below. And then there was Bradley Stevens, 17 years old, captain of the St. James football team. Tall, broad-shouldered, the easy grin of a boy who had never been told no and never believed he would be. His blonde hair was always cut just right, his uniform pristine, his shoes spotless. He was the son of a wealthy oil magnate, a man whose name adorned the brand-new athletic center. The Stevens family's generosity funded scholarships, renovations, and the school's endless fundraising galas. Bradley walked the halls with a casual arrogance that made students shrink and teachers swallow protests. He moved like someone who genuinely believed the entire school was his. And in many ways it was. Jessica first noticed him when he strolled into her classroom during a quiet study period, leaning against the doorframe, eyes scanning the room like a king surveying his domain. At first, it was small, even childish. A paper airplane flicked from the back of the room while she turned her back, a ripple of laughter as it landed on her desk, a whispered comment to a friend that ended in snickers, eyes darting toward her as she wrote math problems on the whiteboard. But the word model floated to her ears more than once. The way it was said carried a sharp edge, an accusation as much as an insult, an invitation to disrespect. Jessica did not react with anger. She observed, took mental notes, and pressed on with her lessons. Her voice remained steady and warm. Her eyes met those of her students with the unshakable calm of someone who'd spent decades handling the heat of cameras and roaring crowds. But deep inside, she could feel a pressure building, like the relentless heat pressing against the school's windows in late summer. She sensed that Bradley was testing her, pushing boundaries to see just how far his influence reached. Other teachers noticed too, but they said nothing outright. In the teacher's lounge, a few colleagues offered her sympathetic looks that disappeared as quickly as they came. A young English teacher named Marcus once whispered while pouring his coffee, "Be careful with that one." And that was all he said before hurrying out the door. The message was clear. This is how it's always been. The administration offered gentle, diplomatic warnings. The headmaster, a silver-haired man with an expensive watch and a flawless suit, pulled Jessica aside one afternoon under the pretense of a wellness check. His smile was pleasant, but his eyes were cold, as he reminded her how important it was to maintain harmony with the parent community. He didn't mention Bradley's name. He didn't have to. As the weeks wore on, the small humiliations continued. Bradley brushed past her deliberately close in the hallway, forcing her to step aside while he grinned down at her. He would call out loudly from the back of her classroom, "Mrs. Cena, is it true you used to be a model?" And the way he said it, the tilt of his head, the lazy smirk, it all turned a simple question into a veiled provocation. His friends snickered, shoulders bumping, eyes glancing between her and Bradley, feeding off the drama like vultures. Every day, Jessica left the school drained in ways she hadn't anticipated. She'd sit in her car in the parking lot, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady her breathing before starting the engine. In her mind, she replayed the sight of younger students shrinking beneath Bradley's gaze, the way some girls stared at her with cautious hope. The teachers who avoided confrontation because they knew the cost. She would drive home as the Texas sun set, the sky ablaze in shades of orange and pink, and find John waiting for her. He'd be there, in their quiet home, the calm anchor in the chaos. He listened without interruption as she described the cruel whispers, the sidelong glances, the quiet cruelties that turned every day into a test of her resolve. When she finished, he would simply nod, eyes serious, and say, "If you need me, I'll be there." And Jessica believed him. But Jessica also believed in herself. In the quiet strength she had forged over years of being underestimated, overlooked, and boxed into the role of a pretty face beside a famous man. She didn't want John to intervene. Not yet. Not unless it was absolutely necessary. She wanted the children in that school to see that there were adults who wouldn't look away. Adults who wouldn't fold under fear or intimidation. She was determined to stay, to watch, to wait, and when the time came, because she could feel that time approaching, she knew she wouldn't stand alone. Jessica Cena could feel the tension simmering like heat waves rising off Texas asphalt. Day after day, she saw the subtle currents of fear running through St. James Preparatory Academy. The school looked perfect from the outside: polished floors, trophies gleaming in glass cases, smiling photos on the website. But underneath, a quiet dread pulsed in the corridors. It wasn't just Bradley Stevens anymore. It was how the whole place seemed built around protecting boys like him. Jessica saw it most clearly in the children, in the way the quieter kids, often wearing second-hand uniforms that didn't quite fit, would hunch their shoulders and avert their eyes when Bradley and his friends strode through the hallways. It was in the way the girls at the lunch tables lowered their voices when Bradley passed, their laughter dying mid-sentence, replaced by stiff silence. She kept her observations close. She didn't rush into accusations, but each day added a new stone to the invisible weight pressing down on her chest. One morning, Jessica was gathering papers from her desk when she noticed a folded piece of paper tucked among her lesson plans. She paused, glancing over her shoulder, but the room was empty. She unfolded it carefully. Scrawled in slightly shaky handwriting were 7 simple words. "Thank you for standing up to him." Jessica stared at the note, feeling the sting of tears she refused to let fall. Someone was watching. Someone cared. She slipped the paper into her planner, pressing it flat, and took a deep breath before facing her next class. She began noticing the same few faces lingering in her classroom during breaks. A group of younger girls hovered near her desk, pretending to look at books or quietly chatting about assignments. They were nervous, casting glances toward the door as though expecting Bradley to appear any moment. One of them, a tiny girl with dark hair and solemn eyes named Rosa, seemed especially afraid. Jessica would sometimes find her standing outside the classroom door, clutching her textbooks as if they were a shield. Rosa rarely spoke above a whisper. Jessica tried to create moments of safety. Her classroom became a small refuge. She left the door open at lunch so the girls could eat inside, away from the cafeteria where Bradley held court with his football teammates. But even inside her room, the sense of Bradley's presence hovered. She could hear his laughter echoing down the hallways, sharp and triumphant. It was like a lion's roar, reminding everyone who ruled the school. Meanwhile, the other teachers kept their distance. A few offered quiet support in the staff lounge, a sympathetic squeeze of Jessica's arm, a worried look. But most seemed determined to pretend everything was fine. The headmaster, Mr. Donnelly, maintained his polished persona, greeting Jessica with practiced charm and steering conversations quickly back to test scores and alumni donations whenever deeper topics arose. One day, in the teacher's lounge, the young English teacher, Marcus, approached Jessica while she poured coffee into a paper cup. "You're brave, you know," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the coffee machine rather than her face. Jessica glanced at him, her voice calm but curious. "Am I?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "He's dangerous," he murmured. "Not just Bradley, his family, the school, the whole system. They'll protect him. They always have." "I know," Jessica replied softly. He fell silent, and after a beat left the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Jessica staring at the rising steam from her coffee. That evening, when Jessica arrived home, the sun was low over Dallas, spilling amber light through the windows. John was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, his forearms resting on the surface, his massive hands folded together. He looked up as she entered, his eyes instantly scanning her face as if searching for new wounds. "How was today?" he asked, his voice deep and gentle. Jessica let out a long sigh. "It's getting worse. I think he's testing me, pushing to see how far he can go." John's jaw tightened just slightly. "If you need me—" "I know," she said quickly. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Not yet, John. I want to try a little longer." He nodded, though his eyes remained hard. "Just don't wait too long." The next day at school, Jessica stepped into the hallway between classes only to feel Bradley brush past her shoulder, closer than necessary. His grin spread across his face as though savoring the discomfort he caused. "Morning, Mrs. Cena," he drawled, his voice edged with mock politeness. "Looking sharp as always." Jessica lifted her chin and stepped aside. "Good morning, Bradley." He kept walking, tossing a look over his shoulder, his friends chuckling behind him. That afternoon, as Jessica finished up a math lesson, Bradley entered her classroom unannounced. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his eyes slowly scanning the rows of desks before fixing on Jessica. "Hey, Mrs. Cena, heard you used to be a model," he said loudly, ensuring the entire class could hear. "You ever think about going back to that? Or is teaching safer?" His friend snickered. Jessica forced herself to keep her expression serene. "I'm here to teach," she said evenly. "If you don't have business in this class, you need to leave." Bradley gave her a look that hovered between amusement and something darker. "Sure thing, Mrs. Cena. Just trying to liven up the day." He winked, turned, and sauntered out. His laughter faded down the hall. Jessica felt the entire class staring at her, eyes wide, waiting for her reaction. She picked up her dry erase marker and continued writing equations on the whiteboard as though nothing had happened. Later that day, the headmaster intercepted her in the hallway. His voice was low and smooth. "Mrs. Cena, I just want to remind you how important it is to maintain harmony here at St. James. We have a very delicate balance with our community. The parents, well, they expect certain things." Jessica met his gaze coolly. "I'm here for the students. I'm doing my job." He gave her a faint, tight smile. "Of course, just remember who we serve." Jessica's stomach twisted. It was the same message, said in 100 polite ways. Don't challenge the power structures. Don't rock the boat. But she couldn't ignore what she saw every day. The way Bradley terrorized the hallways, the way teachers looked away, the way students seemed smaller when he was near. A few days later, Jessica discovered another note left on her desk during lunch. The handwriting was different this time. More rushed, letters slanted and uneven. It read, "Don't let him win." Jessica pressed her lips together as she folded the note and slipped it into her planner beside the first. Her heart thudded in her chest. The students were afraid, but they were also watching, waiting to see if she'd stand her ground. That night, Jessica sat out on the porch under the string lights, the Texas night warm and filled with the buzz of insects. John sat beside her, staring out at the dark horizon. "Is it time for me to come in?" he asked quietly. Jessica shook her head. "Not yet. I need to see this through. They need to see that someone won't back down." John was silent for a long moment. Then he placed his hand over hers, his thumb rubbing gentle circles against her skin. "Okay. But if you say the word, Jess, I'll be there. And it'll end." She gave him a small, tired smile. "I know." In the distance, thunder rolled across the plains, the sky flickering faintly with lightning. Jessica lifted her chin, feeling the wind stir her hair, and resolved that she would stay. She would fight. And when the moment came, she'd be ready. By the third week of September, the heat in Dallas still hung over the city like a suffocating blanket. Inside St. James Preparatory Academy, it felt no different. The air conditioning hummed tirelessly, but Jessica Cena felt the oppressive weight of something colder than Texas heat. The simmering tension that seemed to coil tighter around her every day. Bradley Stevens had shifted tactics. What had begun as whispered jabs and sly remarks now bloomed into open hostility, and he was growing bolder with each passing hour. One morning, as Jessica stepped into the hallway between classes, Bradley came barreling around the corner, laughing with two of his football teammates. Without warning, he slammed into her shoulder so hard her books flew from her arms, papers scattering like startled birds. "Oops," Bradley said, not even pretending it was accidental. "My bad, Mrs. Cena." The boys behind him burst into laughter. Jessica stood there, chest heaving slightly, looking at the papers fluttering around her feet. She knelt, gathering them with careful movements, refusing to let her trembling fingers show. A hush had fallen over the hallway. Students were watching, some wide-eyed, others looking quickly away. Bradley hovered a moment longer, then leaned closer, as she picked up the last of her notes. "You really should watch where you're going, Mrs. Cena," he murmured. "You wouldn't want anyone thinking you're clumsy." He straightened, flashing a grin, and strode off. His friends followed, still laughing. Jessica rose slowly, papers clutched to her chest. She turned and caught sight of Rosa standing a few steps back. The little girl's eyes were enormous, glimmering with tears she fought to blink away. She hugged her books so tightly they bent under her arms. Their gazes locked for one fragile second, and Jessica felt Rosa's silent question. "Will you give up too?" Jessica forced herself to nod faintly at Rosa, a small promise that she would not. That afternoon, the silence from the other faculty members became more pronounced than ever. Teachers moved past her in the lounge, offering polite smiles, but nothing else. A tension buzzed in the air. Unspoken, but nearly tangible. In the faculty meeting later that week, the headmaster cleared his throat delicately. His watch glinted under the fluorescent lights as he gestured for quiet. "We're all aware," he began, "that St. James has always upheld the highest standards of harmony and decorum. As educators, it's essential that we avoid any—" He paused, searching for the right word, "disruptions that could affect the reputation of our community. It's our responsibility to guide our students firmly, but also with sensitivity." He glanced directly at Jessica, though he never spoke her name. Jessica met his gaze, her expression calm but implacable. Inside, her anger simmered. They wanted her quiet. They wanted her to endure. They wanted everything to look perfect. She knew Bradley saw the same meeting as a green light. In the days that followed, his provocations escalated. During class, Bradley began leaning back in his chair, arms folded behind his head, a smirk permanently carved onto his face. He interrupted her lessons with soft snickers or a single sarcastic cough at critical moments. "Mrs. Cena," he called one morning, cutting her off mid-sentence, "is it true you used to walk runways in Paris? Or was that just a local mall gig?" The class tittered. Jessica placed her marker down deliberately. "I'm here to teach math," she said, voice unwavering. "Not discuss my resume. Let's get back to our lesson." Bradley mimed zipping his lips, but the snickering continued. He'd drop whispered comments, layered with innuendo, loud enough for students to hear, but soft enough to give him plausible deniability. More students began lingering outside Jessica's classroom. Eyes wide, shoulders tense, as if weighing whether it was safe to enter. Her room became a haven during lunch, though the students who came inside spoke in low tones, darting nervous glances at the door. Even there, Bradley found ways to invade. On a Tuesday afternoon, Jessica was helping Rosa with fractions when she noticed a bright flash. She looked up to see Bradley standing just outside the classroom doorway, phone raised, capturing a photo of her through the glass window. He lowered it, gave her a mocking little salute, and disappeared down the hall. Jessica felt her pulse spike. Rosa stared at the door, pale as chalk. Later, Bradley's friends circulated whispers about Jessica's secret photos. Jessica knew it was baseless, but in a school like St. James, rumors could crush someone faster than truth could save them. She began finding small, folded notes tucked into her desk drawer, her planner, even slipped under her coffee mug. Some were shaky with fear, others were precise and defiant. The message was always the same: don't let him win. At home, the weight pressed harder. Each evening, Jessica found John waiting for her. He stood in the kitchen when she came through the door, big hands braced on the countertop. His green t-shirt stretched tight across his chest. "How bad today?" he asked one evening. Jessica exhaled shakily. "He knocked my books out of my arms. The kids were watching. Nobody helped." John's jaw flexed, a visible pulse throbbing along the side of his neck. "I can come down there tomorrow." Jessica reached for his hand. "No, not yet." He looked into her eyes. "Jess, he's just a punk kid. I've dealt with punks my whole life." She squeezed his fingers. "I know, but I need to handle this. I can't let the kids think the only way to solve this is someone bigger coming in and punching their problems away." John let out a frustrated breath. "But I'm pretty good at punching problems away." She couldn't help a weary smile. "I know. You're the best at it." He tugged her closer, wrapping his arms around her until she was tucked beneath his chin. The smell of soap and warm skin filled her senses. "You're stronger than you know," he murmured. "But remember, I'm here." Jessica nodded against his chest, but deep inside, she wondered how much longer she could stand it. At school, she noticed how Rosa flinched every time Bradley passed. One afternoon, Rosa lingered after class, books hugged to her chest. "Mrs. Cena?" she whispered. "Yes? Rosa?" Rosa's eyes darted around the empty room. He said if we talk to you, he'll make us pay." Jessica crouched down to Rosa's level. "No one will hurt you, Rosa. I promise." But even as she said it, she felt the lie sour on her tongue, because she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. As September edged toward October, the days grew shorter, but the shadows inside St. James seemed to stretch longer. Every time Bradley passed Jessica in the hallway, his grin seemed wider, edged with victory. Late one Friday afternoon, after a long day of whispered rumors and quiet dread, Jessica sat alone in her classroom, correcting quizzes. The hallway outside was nearly silent. Then she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Bradley appeared in her doorway, leaning one broad shoulder against the frame, arms folded. His eyes glittered with amusement. "Mrs. Cena, staying late again?" "I have work to do, Bradley," she replied without looking up. He chuckled softly. "You work too hard. You know, you're becoming kind of a problem around here." Jessica finally lifted her eyes. "I'm here to teach." Bradley pushed off the doorway, stepping closer. "Sure, teach, or stir up trouble. Depends who you ask." Jessica felt her pulse thunder in her temples. "You need to leave." Bradley smiled, as if savoring a private joke. Careful, Mrs. Cena. This school has a way of reminding people where they belong. Jessica stood slowly. She refused to step back. And where exactly do you think that is, Bradley? His smile slipped for a single heartbeat, replaced by a flicker of anger. Then it returned, brighter and sharper. Guess we'll find out. He turned and sauntered out, leaving the door swinging behind him. Jessica collapsed into her chair, staring at the doorway where he'd stood. Her hands were trembling as she pressed her palms flat against the desk. She glanced at her planner where the notes were hidden. Don't let him win. The words pulsed in her mind. She couldn't leave. Not now. Not when so many eyes were watching to see if she'd stand or fold. That night, she sat on the porch with John, under the quiet blanket of Texas stars. The cicadas hummed in the warm darkness. Is it time for me to step in? John asked, voice low. Jessica's shoulders sagged. Not yet. But the resolve in her voice was thinner than before. Because in her bones, she knew the storm was coming. And it would hit soon. The morning of the assembly dawned with the kind of thick, breathless heat only Texas could conjure. Even before sunrise, the air was already heavy, pressing against Jessica Cena's skin as she pulled her SUV into the faculty lot. The banners in the courtyard hung limp in the stillness. Blue and gold fabric barely stirring over the polished brick. Today felt different. Jessica sat for a moment with her hands braced on the steering wheel. She tried to slow her breathing, to find that same place of calm she'd returned to day after day. But this morning, no matter how deeply she inhaled, the knot in her chest wouldn't ease. She thought of the notes tucked inside her planner. Thank you for standing up to him. Don't let him win. She had clung to those words like lifelines. But as she looked at the entrance to St. James, she wondered if even that would be enough. Inside the building, the hallways were already crowded with students, buzzing with anticipation. Once a month, the entire school assembled in the gymnasium for awards, speeches, and, above all, recognition of the football team. This month's event promised an especially grand celebration. Another championship trophy. Another excuse to center Bradley Stevens. Jessica passed clusters of students clustered around lockers. Whispers chased her like smoke. She caught snatches of conversation. Bet she's gonna cry. He said he has something planned. Cena's wife thinks she's untouchable. Jessica kept walking, her expression carefully smooth. She'd known something was building. The way Bradley's gaze followed her had turned sharper in recent days. His smile was edged with anticipation, as though he were savoring a secret. She entered her classroom to drop off her bag and found a folded note on her desk. She unfolded it slowly, expecting another message of encouragement. But this one was blank. Just a single sheet of lined paper. Somehow, the emptiness felt more ominous than any threat could have. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She slipped the note into her planner with the others. Today, she thought, something is going to happen. When the bell rang, Jessica led her homeroom class down the hall toward the gym. The crowd thickened with every step, the roar of 100 conversations rising around them. She moved along the wall, scanning the faces. Rosa's wide eyes met hers, full of worry. Other students who had sought shelter in her classroom looked away, unable to meet her gaze. They know, Jessica thought. They all know. The gymnasium doors stood open, letting out waves of humid air, already soured by the crush of bodies. Inside, rows of folding chairs had been arranged in neat lines across the painted mascot on the floor. Banners celebrating championships hung overhead. A massive projection screen displayed a slideshow of football victories. Bradley's face smiling triumphantly again and again. Jessica took her place with the other faculty along the wall. The headmaster was at the podium, tapping the microphone. His voice crackled over the speakers, welcoming the students and their parents watching on the live stream. Today we celebrate excellence in academics, athletics, and character. Jessica listened with half an ear, her gaze fixed on the rows of students. She found Bradley almost immediately, slouched in a chair near the front, legs sprawled, one arm thrown over the backrest. He was laughing with his friends, every so often glancing over his shoulder toward her. When his eyes met hers, he smiled. Slow, deliberate, triumphant. The headmaster began roll call. Names echoed through the gym. Andrew Baxter. Yeah, Chloe Reynolds. Present. Jessica's chest tightened. Her name was coming. She knew this was it. The moment Bradley had been waiting for. Mrs. Jessica Cena, the headmaster intoned, voice ringing through the silence. Present, she replied clearly, her voice even. And then Bradley stood. The gym fell abruptly quiet. Hundreds of heads turned to watch as he straightened, stretching like a cat, a grin spreading over his face. He turned in a slow circle to look at the crowd, then faced the faculty row. Actually, he called out, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the gym, I think Mrs. Cena could use a little help with her presentation today. A ripple of laughter rose from his friends. A few nervous giggles answered from the students. The teachers shifted uncomfortably. Jessica felt her hands curl into fists. My appearance is perfectly appropriate, she said, her voice calm but cold. Sit down, Bradley. But he didn't. He took a step into the aisle, then another. Each move measured, theatrical. He kept his eyes locked on her, the grin never faltering. Mrs. Cena, he continued, I just think you'd look more professional if your shirt wasn't so wrinkled. He reached up, miming smoothing an imaginary wrinkle across his chest. His friends erupted in laughter. Jessica's heart slammed against her ribs. She could feel every gaze fixed on her. That's enough, she said, her voice ringing out. Bradley didn't stop. He walked straight toward her, the crowd parting instinctively. When he reached her, he paused, eyes glittering with triumph. And then he reached out. Jessica barely had time to react before his hand closed around the front of her blouse. She felt the sharp yank, a single, violent motion. And the fabric tore open with a sound that seemed to echo off every wall. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. Buttons skittered across the floor, and cool air rushed over her exposed skin. Her pale pink bra stood out stark against the harsh gym lighting. For one terrible heartbeat, the gym was silent. Then the laughter started. It began as a single harsh bark, then spread like wildfire. Jessica stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at her to cover herself, to flee, to vanish. But she forced her arms to remain at her sides. She lifted her chin, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her humiliated. Across the gym, Rosa's face crumpled. The little girl buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Bradley held up the torn piece of fabric like a trophy, his grin widened. Now that's school spirit, he shouted. His friends doubled over with laughter. Phones appeared in hands. Screens lit up, recording every second. Jessica felt the burn of tears she refused to shed. Her breathing came ragged, but she stood straight, refusing to move. And then, the gym doors swung open with a resounding crash. The laughter died instantly. The hush spread like a shockwave as every head turned. Framed in the doorway, backlit by the glaring hallway lights, stood John Cena. He wore a bright green t-shirt stretched over broad shoulders, jeans and scuffed boots. His expression was carved in stone. Jessica's heart lurched. John began to walk forward, each step slow, deliberate. The slap of his boots on the gym floor echoed louder than the students' stunned breathing. Bradley froze. His smirk flickered, then disappeared entirely as John drew closer. The room felt suspended in time. John stopped in front of Jessica. He looked her over, torn blouse, bare skin, and his jaw tightened. Then he turned to Bradley. For a moment, nobody moved. Then John spoke, voice low and cold. "Put it down." Bradley's mouth opened. No sound came. The entire gym watched, transfixed, as John took one step forward. So close now that Bradley stumbled backward, dropping the torn fabric. "Brad, finally!" Watching with fascination, Treme, right? John didn't look away. Nobody made a sound. Jessica felt something in her chest loosen, a dam that had held back all the fear, all the shame. He breathed. And when John reached out to place a steadying hand on her shoulder, she didn't flinch. This wasn't over. But she wasn't alone anymore. Time seemed to hang suspended in the gymnasium as John Cena stood beside Jessica, the torn fabric of her blouse still fluttering in Bradley's trembling hands. John's gaze fixed on Bradley like a spotlight, unwavering, implacable. The silence in the gym was almost unbearable. Students and teachers alike held their breath, the harsh overhead lights glaring off rows of shocked, pale faces. Bradley, only moments earlier grinning like a king, now looked small. His eyes darted left and right, searching for his friends. But they were already stepping back, edging away as John took another deliberate step forward. "Who the hell are you?" Bradley croaked, voice breaking. John tilted his head slightly. He didn't bother answering. Everyone in the room already knew who he was. Bradley tried to regain his swagger. His jaw tightened. He lunged forward, shoving his arm toward John's chest in a move meant to reclaim control. But John moved like lightning. He caught Bradley's wrist in a grip like iron, twisted, and used the boy's own momentum to spin him around. In a heartbeat, Bradley was down on one knee, gasping, his arm pinned behind his back. A chorus of gasps and shrieks rippled through the gym. Phones dropped from shaking hands. A few flashes went off, catching the image of Bradley Stevens, the school's golden boy, brought low by the towering wrestler standing over him. John let Bradley go, stepping back. Bradley collapsed forward onto his hands, wheezing. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of Bradley's friends, a tall boy in a football Letterman jacket, charged forward, roaring in blind loyalty. His fist swung wildly at John's head. John's arm shot up, deflecting the blow with a casual flick of his wrist. His other hand caught the boy by the collar and lifted him off his feet. The crowd gasped as John pivoted, using the boy's own weight to send him sprawling onto the mats with a heavy thud. Two more boys rushed forward. John intercepted them with swift, efficient movements, a twist of an arm here, a sweep of a leg there. In seconds, the attackers lay groaning on the floor, clutching bruised limbs and staring up in shock. And then, it was over. Bradley and his friends were scattered across the gym floor, the fight drained out of them, faces pale and eyes wide with fear. A stunned hush fell over the room. Students stared, phones held halfway up, but no longer recording. Teachers stood frozen along the walls, eyes enormous. John turned slowly, his eyes sweeping over the silent crowd. He found Jessica's gaze. His hand reached out, gently placing his green t-shirt jacket over her torn blouse, shielding her from the hundreds of watching eyes. Jessica clutched the fabric around her shoulders, her chest heaving, tears burning at the corners of her eyes, but not from shame. Bradley, still on his knees, tried to speak. His voice came out in a cracked whisper. You can't touch me, my dad." John stared down at him. His voice was low, but carried to every corner of the gym. "Your dad's not here, and even if he was, he can't save you from the truth." Bradley's mouth worked soundlessly. John leaned closer, eyes hard as granite. "Change, or this is just the beginning for you." He stepped back, offering Bradley no further attention. Slowly, John turned back to the students. His voice dropped to a level only Jessica could hear. "You ready to go?" Jessica drew a deep breath, shoulders back. "Yes." Together, they turned and walked down the center aisle. The students parted for them, eyes wide, mouths hanging open. Phones captured every step, but no one dared laugh or whisper. Outside, the Texas sun was blazing bright. Jessica stepped into the heat, drawing the jacket tighter around her shoulders. She turned and looked back at the gym doors, where a few students peered out, their faces pale, but their eyes burning with something new. Hope. By the time Jessica and John reached the edge of the parking lot, the videos were already online. Clips of John Cena humiliating Bradley Stevens spread like wildfire. Headlines exploded across social media. John Cena steps in after teacher attacked at Texas prep school. Elite school scandal. Football star taken down in viral video. Parents flooded the school with calls. Some screamed at the headmaster, demanding to know how this had been allowed to happen. Others wept over the phone, thanking the administration for finally letting someone stand up to the boy who'd ruled St. James through fear. The headmaster was summoned into an emergency board meeting that very night. He emerged pale and shaken. Before midnight, he was relieved of his position. The Stevens family tried to do damage control, but the wave of public outrage was unstoppable. Bradley Stevens was expelled from St. James. Legal proceedings began for assault and harassment. His parents, who once donated millions to the school, were met with cold stares from other families, their social standing crumbling under the weight of the scandal. Inside the school, change came swiftly. Policies were rewritten. Harassment reporting systems were set up. Cameras were installed in hallways, not to surveil students unnecessarily, but to protect them. Anonymous hotlines were launched. Teachers began speaking up about the years of silence, the warnings they'd tried to give, the reports ignored in favor of preserving donors' egos. In classrooms, the atmosphere transformed. Kids who'd once shrunk under Bradley's gaze began lifting their heads again. Girls who'd left Jessica notes began speaking openly about the bullying they'd suffered, and found that, for the first time, they were believed. One morning, not long after the incident, Rosa approached Jessica in the hallway. She was trembling, but her eyes were bright. "Mrs. Cena," she whispered, holding out a small piece of paper. Jessica unfolded it carefully. In neat handwriting, it read, "Thank you for fighting back." When Jessica looked up, Rosa was crying. But her chin was lifted, and her voice didn't shake. "It's okay now," Rosa said. "It's okay." Jessica knelt and pulled the girl into a hug. Rosa clung to her fiercely, sobbing as weeks of fear finally poured out. One by one, other girls and even some boys stepped forward, telling their stories. Each confession felt like another brick pulled out of the wall of fear that had surrounded the school for so long. A few weeks later, St. James organized a special assembly. Jessica stood at the front of the gym, wearing a simple blouse and slacks. Her hair was tied back, her posture straight. She spoke into the microphone, voice clear and unwavering. "No one has the right to take away your dignity," she told the students. "Strength isn't about hurting others. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." Standing beside her was John, his presence a quiet mountain of reassurance. When he spoke, it was just a few words, but the students hung on every syllable. "You don't have to be me," he said, his voice calm. "You just have to be brave when it matters." Applause thundered through the gym, echoing off the banners and polished floors. As autumn settled over Texas, Jessica and John found peace returning to their lives. Evenings were spent on the porch, the warm breeze lifting Jessica's hair as John rested his hand over hers. Sometimes they spoke of St. James. Sometimes they simply sat together in silence, knowing they'd changed something that mattered. One afternoon, Jessica sat alone in her classroom. Sunlight spilled through the windows, glinting off the desks. She pulled out the notes she'd saved. "Thank you for standing up to him. Don't let him win." She laid them side by side on her desk and smoothed the creases with gentle fingers. Her eyes glistened, but she was smiling. She hadn't let him win. John appeared in the doorway, arms folded, a soft grin on his lips. "Ready?" he asked. Jessica slipped the notes into her bag. She stood, crossing the room to take his hand. "Ready." They walked out into the sunshine together, leaving behind the shadows of St. James. Somewhere in the world, a girl who'd watched that viral video was lifting her head, shoulders square, ready to speak up because she now knew. It was okay to fight back, and it was okay to win. Justice was served, and lives were changed forever. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and share where you're watching from. More true stories are coming soon.